Hello everybody, my name is Daulton Nelson, and today I'd like to give my thoughts on a game I just beat. That game being Amnesia: The Dark Descent for PS4. Amnesia: The Dark Descent is made by Frictional Games. They've worked on games on the past like the Penumbra franchise, Soma, and this franchise, Amnesia. As far as I can tell, they're a pretty influential independent studio. The Dark Descent came at a time when horror games were becoming a little bit more action focused and kind of straying away from kind of the horror identity that they would hold. Dark Descent definitely popularized the atmospherical horror wave of games that came on later, and kind of the renaissance in horror games that we're seeing right now upon other independent studios, and how they're kind of bringing creativity onto the horror scene of video games nowadays. And so I wanted to kind of play the game because of that, as well as I remember watching PewDiePie walkthroughs of Amnesia, which kind of got him popular back in the day. And how I kind of got this game and its successor, you could call it, a Machine for Pigs. I got the collection off of PS Plus for free. So I thought it was a good time to finally play through this game and see what it was all about. Now, before we start this thoughts video, I should point out that I did use a walkthrough while playing my first playthrough of the game, and I did this to kind of calm myself because I do scare easily. So if that's something that kind of bothers you throughout like a thoughts video like this, then I'm just letting you know right now that that's what I did. So kind of starting with the look of the game, Amnesia: The Dark Descent is a very dark game. A lot of times the screen can be very dark, almost pitch black at times, which is intentional given the lantern mechanic in the game. The coloring scheme in the game contains a lot of devalued browns and grays, as well as a little bit of blues and greens, very sick and decaying colors that kind of give off that very dreadful feel throughout the game. And how these colors are positioned within the color realm makes the reds within the game pop out a lot more. And so things like blood and the creatures would pop out a lot more when you saw them. I like the European Brennenburg Castle setting throughout the game. As you kind of progress, they would show more and more of the castle and its kind of inner rooms and workings, and they would always find something new and interesting and something that would always look different. It wouldn't be kind of like the same reused castle setting. They would always insert these kind of set pieces to make these settings really kind of pop out from other settings within Amnesia. And because this game is more of a kind of slow burner atmospherical horror, it does take place in more claustrophobic hallways, and it gives the player an enclosed feeling where they might feel like they can't really escape from the horrors that are around them, which is very effective throughout the game. I thought the particle effects looked pretty good. Things like wind and fire and kind of these rose petals that would breeze throughout the castle looked pretty nice. I like the era of time that they chose to take place throughout the game, which is post-Napoleonic War Britain setting. And so everything kind of has that eldritch horror kind of feel to it. I've seen people compare this game to H.P. Lovecraft's work, which I can agree with. The style is also very dank and wet at times. You can almost kind of feel like the heavy air throughout the game. The only problem I had with the kind of look of the game is the graphical fidelity, which hasn't aged well from what I believe this game is from 2010. Certain textures would look flat or maybe even low res at times. The monsters within the game definitely aren't as scary as they used to be or how I remembered them from when I watched playthroughs of this game. Especially like the monster that everybody kind of knows about now with the hanging jaw and the split eyes, and he's not really wearing anything but kind of like this kind of clothy strap thing around his like lower abdomen. He looks very silly in the context of like today's graphical evolutions. But at the same time, I can also recognize that bodily dysfunctions and bodily deformities can work on certain people, so that horror aspect can still be there in terms of look. And you can definitely tell that the developers really put a lot of effort into the designs of the monsters. You can see certain details that I don't think would be in some other horror games, and really adds to kind of the horror that these monsters are supposed to be portraying, which it's not supposed to be like a jump scare noir-laden kind of modern horror fest. It's supposed to be a slow burner. It's supposed to get at your mind. You're supposed to kind of feel dread and tension throughout the game, and I felt that the look of the game, as well as the monsters, can contribute to that. It's just at the same time, it didn't look great anymore, as opposed to maybe when it could have looked great. Moving on to sound, I'd like to commend Mikko Tarmia, who composed the soundtrack to this game. There are a lot of very slow, almost lumbering tracks, as well as some more fast-paced, kind of dreadful tracks for when you're getting chased or when a monster sees you. He did a really great job, and I loved listening through the soundtrack of this game. I even watched a little interview that is on Frictional Games' YouTube page of him just kind of talking about developing the soundtrack for the game and how he was looking at screenshots and kind of basing the tracks off of those screenshots. The sound, this very screeching kind of high-pitched sound that plays when a monster sees you, is very iconic to this point. It's something that is very distinguishable, and I could definitely point to like this game, that sound belongs to this game. And the kind of soft sound effects that whoever the sound engineer was for this game, the soft sound effects that they put in the game that would just kind of randomly play and contribute towards the atmosphere and the dread were really well done. There were little details that I was noticing as I was listening. The voice acting in the game was also pretty well done. I felt like all the accents fit. I felt like everybody delivered their lines perfectly. There weren't any awkward moments or kind of flubs. It's also kind of easy for this accent that they're portraying to come off as cartoonish, so it's great that these voice actors made it come across as believable. Now, this being a more atmospheric horror type of game, Amnesia does have a pretty good story to go along with it for those of you who are more into like the lore and the story of a game. This game has a very good one attached to it. And how it's delivered in these kind of little pieces, especially with the kind of flashbacks and the amnesia thing that's the title of the game that the character is experiencing throughout this game. It's very well paced, and it's almost like a whodunit type of thing, where you're just kind of slowly being fed piece after piece after piece until you finally have a whole picture and have that full motivation so that when you get to the end of the game, it's a lot more effective and you feel a lot more engaged within what you're doing or what you're trying to do. And kind of continuing off of motivations for characters felt clear. The pacing of the game felt very fluid. And the tone throughout the game was very consistent, so kind of all the good things that you're looking for within a story are here. I mentioned this earlier, but the horror within this game is a slow burner kind of horror. They call this an atmospherical horror type game. So it's not jump scares, it's not in your face, everything is kind of slowly creeping on you and trying to build this kind of dread and tension within your mind, so that when something does happen, you can kind of feel like a horrific weight placed upon your mind, and you're kind of panicking, as say like a monster might be chasing you, and that dread and horror that you've been feeling throughout the game is finally building up upon you, and you're trying to remember, okay, where's the nearest room where I can hide? The only thing I didn't really like about the narrative was that the amnesia within the game, or what that the character experiences, didn't make sense within kind of the narrative of the game. It made sense from kind of like a player experience perspective, because then the developers could just feed the story through in the way that they did in this game. But they never really explained why the main character Daniel had to take an amnesia potion. I think it's because he wanted to kind of forget all of the bad stuff that he did, but as you progress throughout the game, you kind of remember it anyway, so it just feels kind of useless in how he might have thought it would have worked. But it doesn't matter either way, because at the end of the game, you still feel like you got a pretty good story experience and it wasn't too distracting. And so the gameplay and the mechanics within the gameplay of Amnesia: The Dark Descent are very tight. Everything works well with each other. You have things like sanity, darkness, light, visibility to monsters, item management, environmental awareness. All of these things coincide with each other and kind of help each other work so well that by the end of the game, everything felt so complete and everything felt important. It didn't feel like anything was really useless within the game. An example of that would be sanity. And how sanity works in this game is that anytime you experience a horrific or out of this world event, or if you're standing in the dark for way too long, your sanity will drop from very clear to like madness. And the only way you can remedy that is by standing in light or solving puzzles. But the problem with that is that standing in light makes you more visible to monsters, as well as solving a puzzle might leave you open to monster attacks, possibly. And so you kind of have to balance out, like, where am I going to use my lantern? Where's the nearest room I can hide? What kind of items can I use to help me throughout my journey? And it just kind of makes you that much more aware as a player of what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I really love that within video games whenever that happens. The item collection and item uses throughout the game reminded me very much of old school point and click games and how they would kind of treat inventory management and puzzle solving. A game that comes to mind for this reference would be like Day of the Tentacle, where you would search the entire environment, collect all the items you would need, and then you would kind of test each and every item in order to kind of find out the solution. And sometimes the solution could be a little unconventional. For example, there is a puzzle in this game that requires you to tie a rope to a glass jar and then go into a torture room and dip this glass jar into a pool of blood. And so your critical thinking skills are put to the test whenever you engage in a puzzle or some item usage. Speaking upon puzzles, I found the puzzles very clever. They would require you to like read a note or to make sure that you collected all the items you needed first. And then from there you would kind of tackle the puzzle. My favorite puzzle was making the tonic for Agrippa, where you would go around and kind of find these different little ingredients and figure out how they kind of work and piece together. Monster placement in this game was also pretty clever. They always felt placed right where it would kind of inconvenience you the most, but it wouldn't be so inconveniencing to where it would be frustrating. And for new players, they could just kind of hide and wait for the monster to go away, which was really cool for the more patient players. There was only one time in the game where a monster wouldn't go away, but other than that, it seems like hiding is definitely the answer for the smarter player. There are also a lot of visual cues in the game, which I really liked. For example, when you solved a puzzle, there would be a blue flash to kind of tell you that everything is alright and that your sanity has been regained. Or whenever there would be a monster banging down the door, you would see the door banging and you would see the screen kind of like stretch out into a wider field of view. And the visual gameplay here is so well made, it's to the point where you could mute the game and still play it and still know what's going on without having to hear anything. And I really love that. It really takes advantage of the visual medium of video games. And despite using a walkthrough to kind of get through the game a little bit, I still felt that kind of sense of dread and tension, especially throughout my second playthrough when I didn't use the walkthrough. I really started to feel scared and vulnerable again. So to conclude my thoughts, I really loved this game. It's really a tight and complete package. There's not much to really bring it down. The only downside to this game, I feel, is the aging graphical fidelity of the game and how the monsters just don't look as scary as they might have used to look. And that really can be important for a player's kind of experience into a horror game. Everything's kind of gotta look scary as well as be scary. But I don't think that problem is at the point to where it ruins the game at all. I feel like you can still go through this game and still feel scared and horrified. So with that in mind, I'm going to give this game a final score of a 9 out of 10. I'm glad I played this game and kind of saw where this new wave of horror games got their inspiration from, especially the atmospherical horror genre, which I normally don't partake in. This was a new experience for me. So that's it for my thoughts. What did you think? Did you agree? Did you disagree? If you want to let me know, fine. If you don't, that's also fine. You don't have to subscribe or comment. I'm just getting my thoughts out there. However, if you would like to follow my social media links or look at my online portfolio, all those links should be in the description below. So with that being said, I hope everybody has a great day.